The winter of '83 was a graveyard of broken
Pack your
promises.
things, you're coming home.
Sophia had burned her last kitchen chair for firewood. One night away from freezing to death, a heavy fist hammered her door. A giant of a mountain man stood in the blizzard. "Pack your things," he growled. "You're coming home." The Dakota Territory in January of 1883 was not a place for the weak, and Sophia Montgomery was rapidly running out of strength. The wind howling across the Black Hills didn't just blow, it screamed. A relentless, physical force that battered the thin log walls of her isolated cabin. Inside, the frost had crept across the floorboards, thick and white, inching closer to the stone hearth where the fire was nothing but a pathetic cluster of dying orange embers. Sophia sat wrapped in every quilt she owned, her trembling hands clutching a tin cup of hot water, her only meal in 2 days. The pantry was entirely bare. The last handful of flour had been turned into a hard, tasteless biscuit 3 days ago. The last piece of salted pork had been stretched over a week, boiled until there was nothing left but gristle and memory. She was 24 years old, but looking into the shard of mirror above the wash basin earlier that day, she had seen the hollowed, sunken cheeks of an old, dying woman. She was starving. By her reckoning, she had 1 night left before the cold, and the hunger stopped her heart entirely. Her husband, Thomas Montgomery, had brought her out here from Ohio with eyes full of gold fever and promises of a sprawling ranch in the valleys. But Thomas hadn't understood the brutal reality of the West. He had borrowed heavily from Josiah Caldwell, a ruthless banker in Deadwood, to finance a mining claim that yielded nothing but dust and backache. When Thomas died in November, officially of pneumonia, though Sophia always suspected the severe beating he'd taken from Caldwell's debt collectors in town had ruined his lungs, he had left her with nothing but a worthless patch of frozen dirt and a target on her back. Caldwell's men had already taken the horses, the cattle, and the good wagon. They had left her to freeze, assuming the winter would do their dirty work and clear the deed. They were right. Sophia pulled the quilts tighter, squeezing her eyes shut as a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the heavy oak door. She prayed for sleep to take her quickly. She prayed she wouldn't wake up to feel the gnawing, sharp pain in her stomach anymore. Then she heard it. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, heavy, rhythmic. Sophia froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart, sluggish and weak just moments before, began to hammer violently against her ribs. Who could possibly be out in this blizzard? It had to be Harlan Miller. Miller was Caldwell's chief enforcer, a cruel, cold-blooded man who wore a silver-studded gun belt and took pleasure in terrorizing the vulnerable. He had told her a month ago that if she didn't vacate the cabin by the new year, he'd burn it down with her inside. Thud, thud, thud. "Open the door, Sophia." The voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very logs of the cabin. It wasn't the sharp, nasal twang of Harlan Miller. Trembling, Sophia threw off the blankets, her legs weak and shaking as they hit the freezing floorboards. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth, her only weapon, and shuffled toward the door. She fumbled with the wooden latch, her numb fingers protesting, and pulled the door inward just a fraction. The wind violently ripped the door from her grasp, throwing it wide open. Snow swirled into the dark cabin, bringing a blast of air so cold it felt like knives against her skin. Filling the doorway was a mountain of a man. He was clad in a massive, thick bearskin coat, dusted heavily with snow. Ice clung to his thick, dark beard and the brim of his weathered slouch hat. Slung over his broad shoulder was a Henry repeating rifle. He looked less like a man and more like a force of Nasia, a wild creature birthed directly from the blizzard itself. Sophia stumbled backward, raising the iron poker with a pathetic, shaking grip. "Get out!" she rasped, her voice cracking. "I have nothing left. Tell Caldwell he's won." The giant didn't move to attack her. He stepped into the cabin, pulling the heavy door shut behind him, cutting off the deafening roar of the wind. In the sudden, dim quiet, he looked down at her. His eyes, visible beneath the brim of his hat, were a piercing, stormy gray. It was Roman Boone. Everyone in Deadwood knew the name, though few actually knew the man. He was a solitary trapper who lived high up on Iron Peak, a man who traded furs for powder and coffee twice a year and spoke to no one. Rumors swirled around him that he was a former Texas Ranger who had killed his corrupt captain, that he was an outlaw hiding from a federal noose, that he had lived with the Lakota for a decade. He was a ghost of the high timber. "Put the iron down, girl," Roman said, his voice surprisingly calm, though it carried the heavy weight of absolute authority. "You couldn't swing it hard enough to bruise a peach right now." "What do you want?" Sophia whispered, lowering the poker an inch. She swayed on her feet, the sudden adrenaline burning up the last of her energy reserves. Roman's eyes swept the room, taking in the empty shelves, the dead fire, and finally her gaunt, shivering frame. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he unslung a heavy canvas sack from his back and dropped it onto the floor with a thud. "Pack your things," he growled, pulling off his thick leather gloves. "You're coming home." Sophia stared at him, bewildered. "Home? My home is in Ohio." I don't know you, Mr. Boone. I'm not going anywhere with you." Roman stepped forward, moving with a terrifying, silent grace for a man of his size. He grabbed the iron poker from her hand and tossed it clattering onto the hearth. "You stay here, you're dead by sunrise. I made a promise to Thomas, and I intend to keep it." "Thomas?" Sophia gasped, her eyes widening. "Thomas didn't know you. He hated the mountains." "Thomas knew me well enough to drag me out of a collapsed ravine 2 winters ago, when my horse broke its leg and I shattered my ribs," Roman said bluntly, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "He sat with me in a snow cave for 2 days. Saved my life. A month before he died, he rode up to my claim. Told me he'd found something in his mine, something Caldwell wanted. Told me if anything happened to him, I was to come get you before Caldwell's men did." Sophia's head spun. Thomas had found something? He had never told her. And he had arranged for this wild, terrifying hermit to rescue her? The room began to tilt sideways. The edges of her vision blackened. "I can't," she mumbled, her knees buckling. Before she could hit the freezing floor, Roman caught her. His arms were like steel bands, yet surprisingly gentle, as he lifted her entirely off the ground. Through the haze of her fading consciousness, she felt the coarse, smelling warmth of the bearskin coat, the smell of pine smoke and raw leather. "Sleep, Sophia," he muttered, his chest rumbling against her ear. "I've got you." When Sophia regained consciousness, she wasn't in her cabin. She was wrapped tightly in heavy wool and trapped against a broad, solid back. The howling wind was deafening. She opened her eyes and was immediately blinded by the swirling white of the blizzard. She was on the back of a massive roan horse, tied securely at the waist to Roman Boone, who sat in the saddle in front of her. He was shielding her from the brunt of the storm, his massive frame breaking the wind as the horse plunged through snowdrifts that reached its chest. "Keep your face buried in my coat," Roman roared over the wind, feeling her stir. "Don't look up, or your lungs will freeze." Sophia obeyed, burying her face into the thick, animal-smelling fur. She was exhausted, terrified, and freezing. But beneath the terror, a strange, flickering spark of warmth began to bloom. She wasn't alone anymore. This man, a stranger bound by a debt of honor, was fighting the mountain to save her life. The journey felt like an eternity. Hours bled into one another as the horse, a beast Roman called Samson, tirelessly pushed up the steep, treacherous incline of Iron Peak. Several times, Samson stumbled, and Roman would dismount, plunging into waist-deep snow to lead the animal by the reins, physically carving a path through the drifts, while Sophia clung to the saddle. Just as Sophia felt the icy grip of sleep pulling her under again, the wind abruptly died down. They had breached the tree line, entering a dense, sheltered grove of ancient pines. Tucked against the side of a massive rock face was a sturdy log cabin. Smoke poured merrily from its stone chimney, a beacon of life in the dead world. Roman untied her, lifting her from the saddle as if she weighed no more than a child, and carried her inside. The blast of heat inside the cabin was intoxicating. It smelled of cured venison, wood smoke, and strong coffee. Roman placed her gently onto a bed piled high with thick pelt blankets. Over the next 3 days, Sophia drifted in and out of a feverish sleep. Every time she woke, Roman was there. The gruff, terrifying mountain man became a quiet, constant caregiver. He spoon-fed her rich, salty bone broth. He kept the fire roaring. He applied foul-smelling, warm poultices to her frostbitten toes. As her strength slowly returned, so did her awareness of the intense, unspoken tension filling the small cabin. Roman rarely spoke unless necessary. He spent his days repairing traps, cleaning his firearms, or standing by the window, his stormy eyes scanning the white expanse of the mountain below. He was a deeply handsome man under the dirt and beard, with sharp, aristocratic features that didn't match his rough clothes. On the fourth evening, Sophia sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, watching him oil the action of a Winchester rifle. "You said Thomas found something," Sophia said, her voice finally steady. "What was it?" Roman paused, the oiled rag freezing in his hand. He looked up at her, the firelight dancing in his gray eyes. "He found a vein, Sophia. Not gold. Silver. The richest vein anyone's ever seen in these parts. Right beneath that worthless patch of dirt, Caldwell sold him. But Thomas was smart. He didn't register the amended claim in town. He mapped it, hid the map, and then Caldwell caught wind of the rumors." Sophia's breath hitched. "So Thomas didn't die of a fever?" "No," Roman said softly, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "Harlan Miller beat him to death, trying to find out where the map was. Thomas never broke. But Caldwell knows you have it. Or he thinks you do. That's why he's been trying to starve you out. He wanted you desperate enough to trade whatever Thomas left behind for a scrap of food." Tears pricked Sophia's eyes, grief and rage warring in her chest. "I don't have a map. I don't know anything about a silver vein." "I know," Roman said, setting the rifle aside. He stood up and walked over to a heavy iron lockbox sitting on a high shelf. He brought it down, produced a brass key from his neck, and opened it. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment and handed it to her. "Because Thomas gave it to me." Sophia stared at the intricate drawings, recognizing her husband's neat handwriting. "Why?" "Because he knew Caldwell would kill you for it. He figured if I had it, I could sell it to a rival mining syndicate in Denver, set up a trust in your name, and you could go back to Ohio, a rich woman." Roman looked away, staring into the fire. "He trusted me to keep you alive until the spring thaw." Sophia looked at the map, then up at the giant of a man who had pulled her from the jaws of death. "And what about you, Roman? What do you get out of this?" He finally looked back at her, a profound, heavy sorrow in his gaze. "I pay off a debt, and maybe I buy back a fraction of my soul." Before Sophia could ask what he meant, a sound shattered the quiet intimacy of the cabin. Outside, Roman's 3 hunting hounds erupted into a chorus of vicious, frantic barking. It wasn't the sound they made when a wolf or a bear was near. It was the specific, aggressive pitch reserved for men. Roman's demeanor instantly changed. The quiet caregiver vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened killer. He grabbed the Winchester from the table, levering a round into the chamber with a sharp, metallic clack. He moved to the window, peering through a small crack in the heavy wooden shutters. "What is it?" Sophia whispered, terror icing her veins. "Looks like Caldwell got tired of waiting for you to freeze," Roman said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Sophia crept to the window beside him. Down below, struggling up the narrow mountain path through the snow, were 6 men on horseback. Even in the fading light, Sophia recognized the man leading the pack. It was Harlan Miller, wearing his silver-studded gun belt over a heavy winter duster. They had followed Sampson's deep tracks up the mountain. "They brought dynamite," Roman noted grimly, spotting the wooden crate strapped to a pack mule. "They aren't here to negotiate. They're here to blow this cabin off the face of Iron Peak, take the map from my corpse, and bury you in the rubble." Roman turned to Sophia. The vulnerability she had seen in him moments before was locked away behind a wall of pure ice. He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy Colt revolver, pressing it into her hands. "Get in the root cellar under the floorboards," he ordered, his eyes burning into hers. "Do not come out, no matter what you hear.
Pack your things,
If the
you're
door
coming
opens
home.
and it isn't me, you empty this gun into whoever is standing there. Do you understand me, Sophia?" "Roman, there are 6 of them!" Sophia cried, gripping his arm. "They'll kill you!" A dark, dangerous smirk pulled at the corner of the mountain man's mouth. "They're welcome to try. But they're a long way from town, Sophia. Up here, this is my mountain, and I do not take kindly to trespassers." The root cellar smelled of damp earth, old potatoes, and suffocating terror. Sophia sat huddled on a wooden crate in pitch blackness, the heavy Colt revolver gripped so tightly in both hands that her knuckles ached. Above her, the thick floorboards muffled the sounds of the brewing storm, but they did nothing to block the noise of the approaching violence. She heard the heavy wooden shutters slam shut and the iron bar slide into place. Then, silence. A terrible, agonizing silence that stretched for minutes. broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. Where was Roman? Then came the voice, distorted by the wind, but undeniably belonging to Harlan Miller. Boone! We know she's in there. Caldwell don't want no trouble with you, Mountain Man. Send the girl out with the paper and we ride away. You got my word. A solitary gunshot rang out a sharp, deafening crack from Roman's Winchester. It wasn't fired from inside the cabin. It came from outside, somewhere in the tree line behind the structure. A man screamed, a wet, gurgling sound that was quickly swallowed by the wind. He's outside, Harlan roared. Burn it! Throw the powder! Sophia squeezed her eyes shut. Boom! The explosion was catastrophic. The entire cabin violently shuddered. Dirt rained down from the cellar ceiling, coating Sophia's hair and shoulders. The deafening blast sent a physical shockwave through the floorboards, rattling her teeth. A second explosion followed, tearing away what sounded like the front porch. The smell of sulfur and burning pine instantly filtered through the floor cracks. Gunfire erupted in a chaotic, staggering rhythm. It was a blind panic of revolvers and repeating rifles, answered only by the methodical, terrifyingly precise, crack-lever-crack of Roman's Winchester from the shadows of the pines. He wasn't defending the cabin. He had used it as bait. He was hunting them in the blizzard, a ghost moving through the very elements they were struggling against. For 20 minutes, a brutal war raged above Sophia. She heard men shouting in panic, horses screaming in terror, and the snarling of Roman's hounds as they were loosed upon the attackers. Then, heavy boots slammed onto the remaining floorboards directly above her head. Someone had breached the cabin. "Check the back!" Harlan's voice barked, sounding breathless and frantic. "He ain't a man. I swear to God he ain't a man. Just find the paper and let's get out of here." Sophia held her breath, raising the heavy barrel of the Colt toward the trapdoor above her. The heavy, irregular thud of Harlan's boots moved across the room. He was tossing furniture, ripping pelts from the bed. He was looking for the lockbox, but Roman had taken it with him into the storm. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Right above her. Well, Harlan muttered. Sophia heard the scrape of an iron ring being lifted. Light suddenly pierced the darkness as the trapdoor was violently yanked open. Harlan Miller loomed in the opening, a kerosene lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other. His face was smeared with soot and blood, his eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. He looked down, his gaze locking onto Sophia. A cruel smile twisted his lips. Found the prize. He aimed his revolver down at her. Sophia didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She remembered Roman's words. She aimed center mass, squeezed her eyes shut, and pulled the heavy trigger. The Colt roared in the confined space, the flash blinding her. The recoil snapped her wrists back, sending the gun clattering against the dirt wall. Harlan let out a sharp gasp, dropping the lantern. It shattered on the cellar floor, the kerosene instantly igniting in a pool of flames. But Sophia had missed his chest. The heavy lead ball had shattered his collarbone. Snarling in agony, Harlan dropped his gun and lunged down the ladder with his good arm, grabbing Sophia by the hair with a savage yank. "I'm gonna snap your neck, you little." Before Harlan could finish the threat, a massive shadow eclipsed the trapdoor above. Roman reached down, his giant hand wrapping around the back of Harlan's thick winter coat. With a raw, guttural roar, the mountain man hauled the screaming enforcer entirely out of the cellar with one arm. Sophia scrambled up the ladder, choking on the black smoke from the spilled kerosene. She emerged into the ruined cabin just in time to see Roman hurl Harlan against the stone hearth. The enforcer scrambled for a weapon, but Roman didn't give him the chance. He drew a heavy, stag-handled hunting knife and drove it to the hilt into Harlan's chest. Harlan slumped to the floor, his eyes glassy, dead before he fully settled onto the floorboards. Roman stood over him, chest heaving. His bearskin coat was scorched and peppered with holes. A steady stream of dark blood ran down his left arm, dripping off his fingertips onto the floor. Outside, the wind howled over the bodies of Caldwell's remaining men. Roman slowly turned to Sophia. The icy, killing rage in his gray eyes melted away the moment he saw her standing there, safe, covered in soot but unharmed. He took a single step toward her. Then his knees buckled. Sophia rushed forward, catching the giant man before he hit the ground, lowering him gently to the floor amidst the wreckage of the battle. The rest of the winter was spent rebuilding, both the cabin and themselves. The bullet had passed cleanly through Roman's shoulder, but the blood loss and subsequent fever nearly claimed the life that the blizzard and the gunman could not. For 2 weeks, Sophia became the caregiver. She stitched his flesh with a bone needle and silk thread, bathed his feverish brow with snowmelt, and kept the fire roaring. During those long, delirious nights, the truth of Roman Boone finally spilled from his fever-cracked lips. He wasn't an outlaw hiding from a federal noose. He was a former United States Deputy Marshal. 5 years ago, Josiah Caldwell hadn't been a banker. He was a rustler, operating out of the Montana Territory. Roman had tracked Caldwell's gang for months, eventually cornering them in a box canyon. In the ensuing firefight, Roman had shot and killed Caldwell's younger brother. Caldwell had escaped, taking the gang's stolen fortune, and reinvented himself as a legitimate banker in Deadwood. He had placed a staggering, illegal bounty on Roman's head, forcing the lawman into exile in the high peaks to avoid a never-ending stream of bounty hunters. Thomas didn't just find silver, Roman rasped one night, his gray eyes clear but heavy with exhaustion as Sophia changed his bandages. He found an old strongbox buried in his claim, left over from Caldwell's rustling days. It contained ledgers, Sophia. Ledgers detailing every stolen dollar, every bribed judge, every homestead they burned to build that bank. Caldwell didn't want the silver. He wanted the paper that would put a rope around his neck. Sophia stared at him, the pieces finally falling into place. And the map you showed me? A map to where Thomas reburied the strongbox, deep in a collapsed shaft where Caldwell's men couldn't dig without bringing the mountain down on their heads. Roman reached out, his rough, calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Thomas knew I was the only man Caldwell feared. He knew I'd protect the evidence, and he knew I'd protect you. As the deep freeze of February gave way to the gentler winds of March, a profound shift occurred between them. The trauma that had thrown them together forged a bond thicker than blood. Sophia found herself watching the play of muscles in Roman's back as he chopped wood, feeling a deep, yearning ache in her chest. Roman, in turn, softened. The hardened mountain man began to carve intricate wooden figures for her by the fire, his stormy eyes tracking her every movement with a fierce, protective devotion. One evening, as the first signs of the spring thaw dripped from the eaves, Roman stood by the window. "The pass will be clear in a week," he said quietly, not looking at her. "We'll ride down to Cheyenne. There's a federal judge there I trust. We hand over the ledgers, Caldwell hangs, and you sell the silver claim to the Union Pacific Syndicate. You'll have enough money to buy half of Ohio." Sophia stopped sweeping the floor. She looked at the man who had pulled her from the jaws of death, who had bled for her, who had given her a reason to keep breathing. "And what will you do, Roman?" she asked softly. He finally turned to her, a mask of stoic resignation firmly in place. "My debt to Thomas is paid. My debt to Caldwell will be settled. I reckon I'll head further up into the high timber. Wyoming, maybe Montana. Too crowded around here now." Sophia dropped the broom. She crossed the room, stepping directly into his personal space, forcing him to look down at her. She reached up, placing her hands flat against his broad chest, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart beneath the worn cotton shirt. "You knocked on my door in a blizzard," Sophia said, her voice trembling but filled with an iron resolve. "You told me to pack my things, that I was coming home." She looked up into his stormy gray eyes, letting him see the absolute certainty in hers. "Did you lie to me, Roman Boone?" Roman stared at her, the stoic mask shattering into 1,000 pieces. His hands, massive and scarred, came up to tentatively cup her face, holding her as if she were made of the finest, most fragile glass. "No," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't lie." He leaned down, and when their lips met, it wasn't a spark. It was a wildfire. It was the heat of the spring thaw wiping away the bitter winter, a promise of life and survival sealed in a single, desperate embrace. By May of 1883, the town of Deadwood witnessed a spectacle they would talk about for decades. Josiah Caldwell was dragged, kicking and screaming from his opulent bank by federal marshals, the damning ledgers clutched firmly in the hands of a federal judge. Records from the Cheyenne Assay Office that same year show the registration of the incredibly lucrative Iron Peak Silver Company. It wasn't sold to a syndicate. It was owned outright by Sophia Boone. Sophia didn't return to Ohio. Instead, she took her newfound fortune and bought a massive, sprawling ranch in the lush valleys just below Iron Peak. She built a house with a wraparound porch, a massive stone hearth, and enough rooms for the children that would soon fill it. And standing beside her, no longer a ghost of the timber, but a man fiercely grounded in the world of the living, was her mountain man. He had kept his promise. He had brought her home. What did you think of Sophia and Roman's incredible fight for survival and justice? If you loved this Wild West romance and the thrilling downfall of Josiah Caldwell, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow story lovers and subscribe to the channel for more epic, dramatic, real-life tales. See you in the next one.
Hi, my name is William Sunny, the owner and manager of Iron Cowboy Gardena. After watching the video, She Was One Night from Starving, Mountain Man knocked and said, "Pack your things, you're coming home." I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was how a single act of kindness can completely change the direction of someone's life. She had reached the point where she felt forgotten and alone, and then someone showed up offering not pity, but a place where she could finally feel safe again. The story felt quiet and emotional without trying too hard, and I think that's what made it work. Do you think the mountain man understood her pain because he had his own scars too? And what part of the story stayed with you after it ended? Sometimes in real life, people don't need grand gestures. They just need someone willing to show up when things are at their worst. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy these mountain stories about compassion, resilience, and finding hope in difficult times, feel free to stay connected with Iron Cowboy Gardena.